My name is Matthew Carroll. I'm here to discuss the back squat versus front squat versus unilateral lower body exercise, aka the single leg squat. One of the reasons why I'm doing this lecture is to kind of give a better background of why the exercises, what they are, why we do them, and kind of get a better understanding of them. Because at the end of the day, majority of the people that do back squat don't understand why people do front squat, and why front squatters don't understand why people do the single leg squat. Just to kind of get that balance of understanding of what each come to the table. So what we're going to do in this lecture is kind of talk about what muscles are being targeted, the dominancy of the muscle groups, the pros and the cons, and then kind of give an understanding of why we would program this to reach the goal that you want to achieve. So what we're going to first talk about is the back squat. So what I've done already is draw a imaginary line going through the guy doing a back squat. What I've done is that I've created a center of mass point of view. So what your center of mass does is that it's the balance point of the exercise. If we're taking this and the guy is leaning back, what will happen is that center of mass will come back and he'll actually fall backwards. And the same thing as if he's leaning too far forward, he'll fall forward. So what we're going to do with this imaginary line that's going straight underneath the person is kind of provide a point of view of where the most of the work's being done, which is actually the glute and the hamstring and the upper back. So this would be considered a posterior chain exercise. The other nice thing about the back squat is that it works your core as well. So you may be thinking, how in the world am I working my core when doing a back squat? The best example is actually the picture above, watching the guy come up into that squat. You'll actually notice that he has a slight lean, so he's rotating to his left. With that rotation is actually a failed attempt at working that core. The core has given up, which causing that rotation. One of the main goals of the jobs of your core is to actually be an anti-rotation or anti-flexor. So what that means is that draw our core real quick, and our spine goes right through here, and then hips, knee, and ankle. So what I've drawn is our core, what a squat would look like from a back squat point of view. So again, thinking of our core for a second, we want to make sure that there's anti-rotation, so we're not rotating and then we're not falling forward. Because again, if you want to think about it, if I fall forward, the bar comes forward and it can lead to major injuries to the head, back, or lower back. We'll talk about a little bit later on this lecture, but for understanding of now, we don't want that rotation. So then why do we do back squat? Well, one of the positive things is that our glute is the most important muscle. It's the engine of the whole entire body. A lot of our movements come from our glute. It's a strong muscle. We want to make sure that we focus on it getting stronger and working on power. So what we end up doing is that when we load the spine, we're actually allowing for the most opportunity to load the body. Because if we want to keep that strong, nice spine, we can load 200, 300, 400. The record is ridiculous right now on how heavy this back squat can be. So by this standpoint, our back squat is purely strength, purely power exercise. We really want to focus on making sure that we can work on strength when it comes to back squat. Again, it falls into strong core because we work on the anti-rotator, and we also fall into that we don't fall forward. But then we fall into some problems, which in flexibility, torque, shear, compression, and of course, ego. So one of the major issues that we kind of run across in the beginning is the flexibility of our joints. So there's kind of 2 points of view that we really kind of want to focus on just from that lower body aspect of inflexibility. If we get inflexibility at our ankle, we actually see more of a 90-degree, actually more of that way. So the ankle can't dorsiflex, so we don't get this good position. We'll see almost on 90 degrees, which forces the knees and the hips to take on more work. And then for the hips, we can have hip mobility, so if we sit into chairs for long periods of time, we'll actually see issues with the lower back, the upper back, and we can also see knee injuries. So that's one of the major issues that we run across with the back squat, is that if we are not working on our mobility, working on our stability, we fall into that bad habit, and we can actually cause injuries from that. And then the second one is torque, where I started to talk about this a little bit earlier in the lecture, but now we can actually talk about this, is that with that rotation, when the weight is too heavy, when the body will try and compensate by adding a little bit of that torque into our spine to try and bring that weight up. But unfortunately what we've done is we've added load and added rotation. So we're actually forcing the spine to go into positions that it's not comfortable with and strong enough to. What ends up happening is that in the beginning it won't be just one time that will cause problems. It'll be multiple times. So if we are constantly doing the squat and we're rotating, we're actually causing problems between our discs. There's a little sac gel right there. It's almost like a little bit of a buffer between, forces the spines not to kind of collapse onto each other. But with that constant rotation, we're actually wearing down that gel, which can cause issues later on, because enough load and enough torque onto the spine, we can actually cause herniated discs. Then the other issue we run across is that forward lean. So in this picture, we can have demonstrated a person that's squatting pretty good actually. He's coming down. He has a proud chest. His hips, he's breaking parallel. So the way you want to think about when you're squatting is that you want to make sure that it goes down, your femur comes down in parallel. That's when that full range of motion that's working, making sure that your glute is strong enough, and getting the bang out of your buck, bang for your buck. So then we fall into this position where his chest is coming forward, which actually loads that lower back, can load that spine, and also puts us in a poor position. Because again, if you want to think about this, 250 pounds on our spine, and it's falling forward, our head's in the way, and it ends up happening with back injuries, head injuries. We don't want that. The last one, from a physiological point of view, is compression. So you may be thinking, what do you mean by compression? So what ends up happening is that when we squat, we are loading the spine. So think about 250 pounds constantly pushing down against it. And then we have to provide enough force to overcome that 250 pounds. So 250 pounds coming down, and then let's say you have to force that weight up. We're actually combining that compression onto our spine. So again, if we're adding that torque into it, and now we're adding compression, we actually again creating that wear and tear on our spinal discs, which can cause major issues. Again, back to that herniated disc. And probably the most dangerous and non-physiological problem is ego. As kids, we are always taught we want to be bigger, faster, stronger. So what ends up happening is that we kind of throw weight that we're not comfortable with. Again, you can go on YouTube and you can type in squat fails, and you can watch like a 16-year-old try and squat 400 pounds. But what ends up happening is probably one or two of the physiological issues I talked about. the rotation, the forward lean, the compression, and with the ego, we kind of fall into this. I want to be bigger, faster, stronger, so I'm going to be using weights that I'm not comfortable with, which can lead to injury. But by no means am I saying that the back squat is the worst exercise. So if you're working on sport or you're trying to get stronger, by far this is the best answer. If you care about your numbers, but what I'm suggesting is that just be safe. Really focus on making sure you keep that strong core and you make sure that you don't have that rotation, that forward lean. Be wearing a weight belt for the compression, and then most importantly, of course, work on your mobility. We're going to next talk about this front squat. Front squat is a little bit different than back squat. Some people understand what the front squat is, some people don't. So what I'm going to do is going to create that center of mass. So what I've done is just create a center of mass for the front squat. As you can see, it's a little bit more far forward than it is with the back squat. So again, using the example that they have here. So if he was traditionally doing the back squat, this is where his back center mass would be. So you can clearly see that the center mass has gone forward. So what this allows for a little more safety, it's a little bit more quad dominant, but we're still working the glutes, we're still working the hamstrings. It's also considered an anti-flexor because what ends up happening is the weight's in front, so we have to resist that weight. Again, I'll talk about this a little bit later on in the lecture. So, it's considered a knee dominant exercise. With the forward shift in center of mass, our quads take over. Instead of our glute, our quads take over, so it's considered a knee dominant exercise. By no means are we saying that we're just working the knee. We're working the whole entire body still, but we're just adding a little bit more emphasis to the quads. So what are the pros for this? One of the pros for this is that we actually can get a straighter spine. So when we do a back squat, we that's a little bit extreme, that forward lean. With the front squat though, we can actually see more vertical spine. So coming from and saying, so what? Why would I want a more vertical spine? And one of the best ways to explain that is to use the analogy of a water hose. So if you want to think of a hose, we draw one straight line, that's our hose. What happens is we can get water to come out at a better rate. So thinking about this from a front squat point of view is that we can actually get more power output out of this. But if we go from a back squat point of view, there's a little bit of a bend. So we're not going to get as much water out as possible. So this provides the opportunity for a safer position, because for here we see that bend for that back squat. It can cause issues. Again, we talked about this, the forward lean of the shear force. So we don't get that forward lean as much, and it's a safer position for the body to be in. From a safety aspect, what we kind of fall into is this. If the weight's too heavy, we can actually just push the weight away from us. So if we're in squat rack and we have 250 pounds, kind of using the example from the back squat, we can actually just push the bar away, take a step back, and we separate ourselves from the bar. This will provide a little more safety, because again, if you are lifting weights and you're like, I need to bail, it's an easy opportunity to bail, versus the back squat where you have to kind of fall forward and make sure you catch it in the rack. And then the next aspect of it is that it's considered an anti-flexor. So going back to our drawing, let's say this person's holding 25 pounds. The weight is pulling you down into the ground with 25 pounds because of gravity and because of the weight. So we actually have to resist that flexion. So we have to make sure that it's working, and we are not falling forward. We're keeping a nice strong position. So that's one of the reasons why we call this an anti-flexor exercise as well. The last one about this, what's nice about this is the flexibility. What's nice about the front squat is that it actually allows us to put our body into a position where we can go into that proper depth. The issue with the back squat is that when we come down, if we're lacking hip mobility or lacking ankle mobility, our body won't be able to get into that good position. But since the weight's a little bit more forward, it provides a little bit more opportunity to get into that good position of that front squat. On the opposite side of it is that when we're doing front squat, we need, with a bar at least, we need to make sure that we have good wrist mobility and shoulder mobility. If we lack that mobility, let's say from a wrist point of view, that when we rest the bar is going to try and roll forward and we can't get into that good position. Or if we lack that shoulder mobility, we're going to think about our forearms. I'm going to try to hold the bar. So if we lack shoulder mobility, try and hold that bar, we're not able to go up into that good position, and so we kind of hold the bar. So that's the bar in front of us, which is an easier opportunity for the bar to kind of fall out of that position. What's nice about this though is that you don't have to be squatting with a bar. Goblet squat is considered a front squat since the weight is far forward, and we can able to actually work on that full range of motion, and we can eventually get you into that good position. And then the last one we're going to talk about is the unilateral lower body exercise or single leg squat. So in the end of the day, what's nice about the unilateral lower body exercise is that it takes a little bit from the back squat and takes a little bit from the front squat. You get the focus on, still get that core stability, you still get that stabilizing muscle groups, but on the positive side, you get to work on the imbalances of your left and your right. What's kind of cool about the body is that it doesn't work symmetrically. You'll have favorite side. Say if you're right-handed, usually your left leg's stronger, or if you had a knee injury or any type of injuries before, it kind of shapes on how the body influences the world. But we want to build that balance. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that our left leg is just as strong as our right. The back and the front squat are a bilateral exercise, so you build strength on both, but you'll sometimes consider that your right leg may be a little bit stronger than your left, and that imbalance just constantly grows. So if my left leg handles 45% of the squat, my right leg does 55%, and I'm constantly doing back squat. I constantly see a rise in both legs, but I don't see that balance between the two. So from a dominant point of view, it's both a hip and knee dominant exercise. We can actually shift between the two by increasing the position of the body. So if we put you in a higher box, or if we put you in a lower plane, but we can actually influence that and change it up on you to try and work on the dominancy of the muscle group. From a functionality point of view, is that when we go through a normal day, we are rarely on both legs. When we're walking is usually considered a unilateral exercise, which is a kind of a cool thing to kind of look at from that point of view. But I do challenge you, walk around and actually notice how much time you're in a stance position where both legs are on versus a stance leg where only one leg is on. So it's a more functional aspect from working on making sure that we have that unilateral strength that are equal. Falling into that bilateral limb deficiency, again talking about how my right leg may be stronger than my left or might have a hip injury, but we want to build that symmetry. The other kind of interesting thing from a unilateral point of view is that if I try doing a 3 rep max on my front squat and then divided it in half, I could actually do more on both my left and my right than I would do with both of my legs. The best way to actually test that out is if you have a wrist ergometer, you can actually squeeze it with your left, squeeze it with your right, and then squeeze it with both, and you'll kind of notice how your left and your right will actually have a stronger grip strength than both combined. And then going from a anti-flexor, holding that goblet in a goblet squat position and doing, let's say, a split squat, is that, again, the weight's pulling you forward and you have to resist that forward lean to turn that into an anti-flexor. And then from a stabilizing point of view, if I do a suitcase lunge where I have one weight, it's just going straight at you. Let's say this person's holding 25 pounds and this arm is holding 10. We want to make sure that both sides are stabilizing from the torso point of view and from the hip point of view, that we're not leaning to our left or leaning to our right. Again, we want to focus on making sure that we want to create the balance, and we don't want imbalances. We don't want to make sure that one side is stronger than the other, which, again, from a functional standpoint of view, will actually decrease your injuries, because if there's a balance between the two, there's a better chance you will not get injured. And then finally, you can kind of see this decrease the lower load on the back. Since the weight is not on our spine, we don't have to fall forward, we don't have to fall backwards. And then we also work on improving our mobility, allowing for that ankle, knee, and hip to go through the ranges of motion that they need to. Really, the only con for the single leg squat is its difficulty. Because at the end of the day, I dare you to try a single leg squat. You'll notice that you can't get through that full range of motion. What we can do is we can actually improve that by starting you off with a split squat, then going into a rear foot elevated, then put you on a TRX squat, and then eventually put you in that single leg squat. What we've kind of noticed is that we've slowly decreased the amount of weight on that back leg and forcing more demand on that front leg. So finally, putting all things together, the back squat is good for that pure strength aspect. The front squat is a little bit safer. Again, really the issue you run across is just that flexibility and owning that position. And then finally, unilateral or single leg squat, kind of work on that stability and balance. But by no means am I saying one is better than the other. I have a little bit of a bias towards front squat and single leg squat, the more research I'm reading. But if you have any questions about this, please feel free to email me or ask any of your trainers at your sites about this. But this is just a kind of a fun, easy, kind of cool thing to understand. But I really appreciate you for attending this lecture, and I hope that you attend more of my lectures. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.